Hi, I'm Richard Rinehart, Director of the Samek Art Museum at Bucknell University. What I'd like to talk with you about today is a little-known aspect of museums. Most people are familiar with the fact that most colleges and universities around the world have a library, but less people may be familiar with the fact that most of those universities also have museums or galleries. And that's not just a mistake. It's not just because museums are fun places to go look at art and other artifacts, although that's true. It's because museums also serve an important research function. And that is that we preserve and provide access to primary source material. So what is primary source material? Well, that is the evidence of history. It's the paintings, the drawings, the fossils, the bug collections, the historical artifacts, and the original documents that are in the collections of museums around the world. So you might be asking now, what makes it primary? Well, now we're talking about how those collections are used in the context of research. So let's say that you're a scholar at a university. Let's say you're an art historian, and you're researching a book that you're going to write on the Mona Lisa painting. In doing the research for your book, you're probably going to read a lot of other people's books about the Mona Lisa. But at some point in your research, what you're also going to do is you're going to visit the Mona Lisa. You're going to go to Paris and go to the Louvre and get as close to that original painting as you can and study it closely. Now, when you finish your book and you publish the book becomes secondary source material. The Mona Lisa is primary source material. And to go further out, if some high school student in McMinnville, Oregon reads your book but doesn't go visit the painting, and they write a paper about the Mona Lisa, their paper then becomes tertiary evidence. So you can sort of start to see with that anecdote that it's endless, right? There are endless layers of source material that radiate out from the primary source material, right? And serious scholarship is defined as that which is closest to or closer to the primary source material, the original, the real thing. Let's just leave the art world for a little bit, and I can illustrate perhaps some of the social importance of primary source material. Imagine for a minute the United States Constitution. Imagine that after it was written and ratified and accepted, that nobody thought to preserve it. Nobody thought to preserve that primary source material. Can you imagine the conversations that we'd be having today? One politician would stand up and say, I'm going to do X because it's in the Constitution, and I have a transcript here that somebody made at the time. And somebody else is going to stand up across the room and say, you can't do that because I have a different transcript and it says something totally different. And it'd be endless, right? So you can see there are social as well as artistic reasons why it's important to be able to go back and consult the primary source material. So let's go back to the art world. Artists have been making paintings and sculptures for centuries, and museums have been collecting and preserving these paintings and sculptures for centuries. But what happens when that artwork, that primary source material, is digital? Right? Just like everybody else in the 21st century, artists have joined the technological revolution. So artists still make paintings and sculptures, but artists today are just as likely to make a multimedia projection or a video game or an interactive website as their artwork. So how do museums then think about preserving those kinds of digital artworks? Well, it's perhaps no coincidence that I'm standing here in the music hall of the Weis Center for the Performing Arts, because the answer to that question is that you don't treat a digital artwork like a painting. Instead, you treat it like a piece of music. And what I mean by that is that instead of, say, taking a picture of the digital artwork as a way of preserving it, what you do instead is you interview the artist, and you interview them about the parameters for recreating the digital artwork. So for example, you might say to an artist, we noticed that you had some text come up on the screen at a certain point in your multimedia artwork, and it was in this font. Is it important in the future when we show that for the artwork to have that text in that specific font? Could it really be any font, or do we have to stick with that? And you note the answer. You might ask other questions like, we noticed that the font was this specific shade of purple, Again, in the future, when we recreate this artwork, does it need to be that specific shade? Could it just be any purple that's available? Or in fact, could it be any color? Note the answer. You might ask questions about scale. You might say, we noticed that your artwork, as you present it today, was meant to be seen on a computer screen, a standard computer screen, let's say about that big. Is that the scale that it should always be shown at? Or in the future, could we project it on the side of a mountain? And then what you do with the answers to all of those questions is you write them down into a document. And that document becomes something like a recipe for recreating the artwork in the future, or like a musical score. Now, a musical score is a very special kind of documentation of an artwork, in that it doesn't record the past state of an artwork. Instead, it records the future state of an artwork, right? In reading the score and reperforming the score, it allows us to bring the artwork back to life over and over again, far into the future. We have musical scores that are centuries old that we're still performing and bringing back to life. It even allows for minor and perhaps sometimes necessary variations in that recreation, right? So when you're in music and you're playing a note, your approach or your attack to that note might be slightly different than was originally played. But if we play all the right notes in all the right order, that is to say, if we follow the score, that maintains the integrity of the artwork. You know, we know if we play all the notes in the right order, that that is Miles Davis's Blue and Green song. We'll be able to recognize it. It still has its integrity as an artwork. So how do museums go about preserving these kinds of artworks then? Well, unlike a book and unlike a painting, you can't just put it on a thumb drive, take it back in the vault and stick it on a shelf and expect to come back in 20 years and find it working, right? I mean, in 20 years, we probably won't be using thumb drives. No computer is going to have a port on it, so you won't even be able to see what's on the thumb drive. If you were able to get the files off 20 years in the future, you'd still have problems because the software that it was written in is probably going to be completely out of date and incompatible with any version that currently exists. Or more likely, the company's gone out of business and just the software doesn't exist anymore. So instead, writing a score, interviewing the artist as I outlined before, and then writing a score for digital art allows us to bring those works of art back to life far into the future using whatever equipment is available to us at the time. As long as we perform the score correctly, we're going to get the same artwork back. A friend of mine who worked for the Rand Corporation once said, digital information lasts 5 years or forever, whichever comes first. Well, I'm happy to say that museums have taken up that challenge, and we are currently at work preserving even our digital culture for the future. Thanks.